So in recent months, I have been focusing mainly on catching up on newer movies and some of the movies that I missed of this last year in 2023. If you're newer here to the channel, you probably think that's primarily what I do. But literally just in September, I was in the middle of covering the both Shrek franchise and the Harry Potter franchise, and I'm still working through the Land Before Time series with my buddy Mike of Did You See That? But today we're going to be continuing on with the Shrek franchise with the only movie that I did not watch in theaters in the Shrek franchise, and the only one in this entire rewatch that was not a rewatch, that was the first time watch. So without further ado, let's get back to talking about some older movies. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're finally getting around to talking about Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which is directed by Crawford and Januel Mercado and stars people once again like Banderas and Salma Hayek, as well as some new faces to the franchise like Harvey Guillen, Florence Pugh, Olivia Colman, John Mulaney, Wagner Moura, and many more. I'm very happy to be finally talking about this movie. This is a movie that I'm kind of ashamed it's taken me this long to see. I purposely waited to watch it for this series of reviews, and literally as we got into October of last year, 2023, I just instantly started talking about a bunch of horror movies and Halloween movies for October, and then shortly after that I was accepted into the Critics Association in my local area, which opened the doors to catch up on a lot of movies that I had not seen that are big releases for 2023. I was sent a bunch of screeners and I was invited to a bunch of press screenings in person, and it just took up all of my time covering new or newer films, and I just hadn't gotten around to going back to covering some of these older films. But now that we're in 2024, there's going to be a mixed bag once again of new stuff here on the channel, as well as revisiting some old franchises. I have plans to make some things a little bit different when it comes down to going back and tackling older franchises or older films, but I wanted to finally wrap up the Shrek series with the only film that I'm kind of ashamed to say I didn't see in theaters. If you've been watching this series of reviews, then you know that the Shrek series means a lot to me. I was a kid when those first films came out, and I grew up with the franchise, and while not every single installment and not every single thing about those films is top tier to me, I really love them, and some of them for me are peak animation of their time. And so I was hearing so much good about the sequel to Puss in Boots. It was just one of those films at the tail end of 2022 that I unfortunately missed, and everybody throughout the course of 2023 who had heard I had not seen that movie was consistently like, dude, you gotta watch Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. You missed one of the best animated films, if not the best animated film of 2022. And I always intended to watch it way sooner than this for this series of reviews. So without further ado, let's get into this one, because I'm happy that I finally checked it out. It was on Netflix. I got to sit back and check it out finally at home, and instantly the first thing I have to talk about is it's just great to be back in the world of Shrek with a new kind of sense of animation. I really enjoyed the animation in this film. That's one of the main things I had heard people talk about, and it was absolutely stunning, especially in the action. It's very clearly inspired by what Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse have done, which we've seen in a lot of films at this point. That comic booky style that can sometimes feel like it's a bit static and kind of moving in slow motion, where it has fluidity but also kind of has this kind of, I don't know how to really explain it, but this kind of, rigid movement to the way the characters move. It's got this cool look to it amidst the action, and Puss in Boots clearly took inspiration from that. So visually, right out of the gate, a huge step up, arguably maybe the best animated looking film in the Shrek franchise. It was crisp, it was cool, it was visually stunning. I really liked a lot of the cinematography, if you will, the way a lot of these sequences were animated, the framing of a lot of these shots. It was just a really visually stunning film for the Shrek franchise. And then on top of that, you have a really interesting story. So let's talk about that. Puss in Boots at the beginning of this movie is, saving a town. He's doing his Puss in Boots thing. He's got a big song that's singing about him and his fantastic adventures. And this leads to him unfortunately dying. When he comes to life, though, he learns that that was his last life, and he's currently on his last life. He does not have any more lives after this to spare, and this kind of puts the fear of God into him. Most notably when he's visited by a wolf who's played by Wagner Moura, who is easily the most threatening villain that's in the entirety of the Shrek franchise. And this wolf is the literal personification of death, and pretty much comes to Puss in Boots saying, I'm coming for you. And Puss in Boots has a really hard time fighting off death initially, which leads him to be very fearful. So he chooses to put the Puss in Boots title to rest. He decides to no longer be Puss in Boots and instead goes to a location that he heard about through a friend, where he can now be a lab cat for a woman who has a bunch of other cats. And then we jump into the future a little bit, and Puss in Boots has a long beard, and he's no longer the adventurous, swashbuckler that he once was, and is instead now just kind of this lazy, defeated individual. And I found that Puss in Boots was incredibly relatable here. They gave a really relatable story. The man even has an anxiety attack in this film at a certain point where his heartbeat is pounding, he feels paralyzed, he can't move, he doesn't know what to do. And it's something that I think a lot of people in the modern day can really relate to. As a kid growing up with the Shrek franchise and most of it being fun and whimsical, even though it's got its darker themes at times, it's nice to have grown up with the franchise, now be 30 years old, watching a Puss in Boots film where our main character, Puss in Boots, is no longer who he once was. And that's something I can relate to. In recent years, I've dealt with anxiety in a way that I never did when I was younger. I used to kind of feel like I was invincible in my teen years and in my early 20s. Nobody could have told me anything other than me doing what I wanted to do, and I felt super comfortable in my skin and what I was doing, and I never really felt too awkward with things. I was just very straightforward, and I felt very confident, if you will, in a lot of ways. And as I've gotten older, while I have confidence in certain areas, anxiety is definitely something that has kind of crippled me at times. And when I had my first anxiety attack, I remember it like just completely taking over my body and my psyche, and it led to a lot of fear. It led to a lot of hesitation with doing certain things. And so watching this movie and watching Puss in Boots go through this entire anxiety element of the film, I thought was really, really great. I thought that they handled that so well. And Antonio Banderas gives easily one of the best performances he's given in recent years. If you saw my most recent video that I've done here on the channel, then I haven't been the biggest fan of some of the straight-to-video movies that Antonio Banderas has done. But when it comes to Puss in Boots, I mean, I'm so happy to hear that the hype kind of lived up to the hype, if you will, that the movie lived up to the hype, and that Antonio Banderas was so good in this role. He just showed us why we love Puss in Boots in the first place. So going back to the story though, he's in this cat house with this lady who has all these cats, and he meets a little dog that's dressed up as a cat that they decide to just call Perrito. He's played by Harvey Guillen, and he's just this super lovable, very excitable, very positive character who's gone through a lot of traumatic and terrible things, but remains positive and kind of is this thing for not only Puss in Boots, but Kitty Softpaws as well. He's kind of this symbol, if you will, of how we can still fight through the negativity with positivity in our own lives, how it really is your own personal perception that is going to get you in and out of something. And that's something that I think we all know, but oftentimes can't really apply to our own lives. My dad has always said that to me since I was growing up, that my dad has this perspective that for him, no matter how stressful something gets, no matter how hard things get, more often than not, my dad is pretty good about just kind of like staying at peace. And he'll always tell me, to just stay in the right headspace, and that if you have a peaceful outlook on things and you try to stay positive throughout hard times, more often than not, you're gonna just enjoy your experience, or you're gonna come out of the other side far more positive instead of if you're freaking out. And so Perrito, even though he's a really silly character, is the symbol of that in this film, and he's a really great character to have in the mix with Kitty Softpaws and Puss in Boots. Now, Kitty Softpaws is another one to talk about here, who of course is reintroduced into the story, sees Puss in Boots with this big beard, realizes he's not necessarily who he once was, and we learn that they had a bit of a falling out, as neither one of them showed up to their wedding day in the past that's off screen, and that led to the two of them falling apart. They felt betrayed by one another. But the funniest part is that they didn't even know that each of them didn't show up to the wedding initially, or at least Puss in Boots doesn't know that Kitty Softpaws didn't show up, but they feel kind of betrayed. They have a falling out, and throughout the course of the film, they kind of reignite this romance simply because they've realized that they've become different people as they've matured and as they've aged and as they've kind of let go of the more angsty, if you will, versions of who they were when they were younger, or these overconfident and very cocky individuals they were when they were younger. And now that we have the setup of who these characters are, the base premise of this film though is that there is one last wishing star out there in the world. There's a map that everybody wants to get their hands on, and now Puss in Boots initially wants to get his hands on this wish so that he can give himself a new set of lives, so that he can enjoy his life and not have the fear of death. And over the course of the film, most notably, he has to realize that he can live a full and really luxurious and fulfilling life with his just one life, instead of having to refill all his lives and kind of live recklessly, leading up to multiple deaths, and that he doesn't necessarily need those lives to live a fulfilling life with Kitty Softpaws, with the people in his life. He doesn't have to be this over-the-top swashbuckler and put himself in dangerous situations all the time. And then there's a few villains in the mix who are also going after this wishing star for their own personal reasons, most notably Florence Pugh as Goldilocks, who's also there with Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear, who are played by Olivia Colman, Ray Winstone, and Samson Kayo. And then you have John Mulaney in the mix as Jack Horner, who also is going after this star. And also, like I mentioned in the mix, you also have Wagner Moura, who's the wolf, who's not necessarily going after the star, but is specifically coming after Puss in Boots, and is the literal personification of death. He wants to come and challenge Puss in Boots and make him fight for his life and take his life if he's not willing to fight for it. I thought all the villains in this film were awesome. I really thoroughly enjoyed the fact that this is a film that had a ton of villains, that had a pretty, reasonable runtime, and was able to give all of these villains time to shine in their own ways. If I had to say there was one that I would maybe remove from the story that maybe had the least impact on me narratively, it would probably be Jack Horner, but not because I thought the character was poorly written. I thought that he was the most malicious of the bunch. He was the one villain that just felt super selfish. He's here for himself, and all the characters kind of have to deal with him in a lot of ways, including the other villains. Whereas Goldilocks has her own ulterior motives. She wants a family, and she kind of doesn't necessarily recognize that she has one in the three bears that are with her. The three bears kind of want to help her obtain that goal, but also are kind of heartbroken that that's the goal that she wants. And then Death doesn't give a damn about the wish at all. He just wants to kill Puss in Boots. And so I thought this film had a really great mix of a bunch of villains with a bunch of ulterior motives that ultimately led to a big fun action sequence at the end that's beautifully animated, and ultimately leads to a film that has a bunch of great themes about family, about love, about living our life to our fullest, about leaving fear at the door, about, staying positive through the dark times. And I think there's just so many things you can take from this film. I was wildly impressed having finally checked it out. I wish I had gotten the chance to check this out in theaters, and I'm so glad that so many people were pressing me all the time to check this out. The next time that we see a movie in the Shrek franchise, whether it's the rumored Donkey solo movie or Shrek 5 that they've talked about, or another Puss in Boots, I will be in the theaters day one to definitely check it out so that this does not happen again. And the most notable thing about the ending of the film is that after everything is resolved and all is good, the movie ends with Puss in Boots, Kitty Softpaws, and the gang heading off to far, far away to go see some old friends, and you hear the music from Shrek, and then the credits roll, which gave me some chills. I love that, and I love that this movie in particular had a couple of moments where we got to see some cameos from Shrek and Donkey and Pinocchio, which it was very brief, but I like the fact that they at least included it to some degree, whereas in the first Puss in Boots, which was more of a prequel, there's no real connection directly to the Shrek franchise. One last thing I want to mention about Puss in Boots: The Last Wish before we move into the final two shorts for the Shrek franchise to cover here on the channel is the fact that there's one big mistake that's left in this movie. If you've been watching my series of the Shrek videos, you know that I've been picking out little inconsistencies between the movie where one character will appear differently in another movie, or they'll reference a character that appears differently in another movie. And in the case of this one, we have Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear. And if you remember from the first Shrek, Mama Bear didn't necessarily make it. Let's just say that. So there's some inconsistencies narratively based on what we've seen with Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear in the previous Shrek films, in the first Shrek film to be specific. But yeah, that was the one little thing that I noticed that was an inconsistency. And there's been a ton of them. If you are interested in hearing about the inconsistencies in the Shrek franchise, definitely go back, check out my other videos where I've kind of pinpointed some of those out. And so now let's talk about some of these shorts. I've been covering all the movies, accompanied with two shorts to cover all of the Shrek franchise in every single capacity. And today we're going to be talking about the final two shorts in the Shrek franchise, with the first one being Puss in Boots: The Three Diablos, which is the 13-minute short where Puss in Boots has to work with three little cats who he ends up kind of making three musketeers in a way, the three Diablos instead. And they're kind of rambunctious, they're a little bit crazy, the humans are afraid of them, but they allow him to work with them so they can stop this guy called the Whisperer. There really isn't much more to it. Puss in Boots kind of teach them how to be Puss in Boots in their own way. They kind of have this little Three Musketeers vibe to them, and they end up becoming the royal guard of the queen who was afraid of them at the earlier part of the short, and that's pretty much it. There isn't much more to it. It's a really cute 13-minute short. It was nice to see Antonio Banderas as the character of Puss in Boots again, and the three Diablos are very, very cute throughout the course of this short. And now moving on to the final Shrek short. It's been a lot of fun covering these shorts, and the last one is Shrek the Halls, which is a Christmas Shrek one, and is one of the few that's a little bit longer. This one's about 20 minutes long, and the base premise is that Shrek is having his first Christmas with Fiona and his three kids, and doesn't really know necessarily how to do Christmas. So he ends up getting a book literally called Christmas for Village Idiots, where he goes above and beyond to try to make the most Christmas that he possibly can for Fiona and the kids. Unfortunately for him though, everybody else that's part of their family, Donkey, Puss in Boots, the wolf, the three blind mice, the three piggies, all of them decide to show up to their house and just make a huge Christmas bonanza. Everybody's having a great time though, except for Shrek, who feels like they've all come and ruined the planned Christmas that he had specifically for Fiona and his three kids. And over the course of the short, Shrek has to learn that that is what Christmas is all about. It's about a rambunctious, crazy family that oftentimes leads to a chaotic Christmas, but ultimately that the spirit of it is all being together. It's a pretty straightforward and cute premise. I thought it was a good time to watch. I enjoyed watching both of these shorts. And that wraps up my thoughts on the Shrek franchise, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed these videos. It was a lot of fun to make these videos. It was a lot of fun to dive back into the Shrek franchise. I look forward to revisiting these films in future years. But for now, I think I'm going to take a little bit of a break from the Shrek franchise, as I've binged a lot of it in just the last few months. And there's a lot more franchises coming on here onto the channel that we're going to be talking about. So definitely stay tuned, as well as a bunch of new reviews. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. Hit that like button, comment down below which is your favorite Shrek movie, Shrek short, whatever the case may be, or even just leave a favorite memory you have with the Shrek franchise down below. Whatever the case may be, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.